This is the Evolve Your Wedding Business podcast, episode number 128.
In a world where wedding professionals are struggling to market and grow their businesses, one podcast brings together top experts and actionable strategies to help you build the wedding business of your dreams. This is the Evolve Your Wedding Business podcast. Here is your host, Heidi Thompson.
Hey there, and welcome to the podcast. I am your host, Heidi Thompson. And in this episode, I'm doing something a little bit different, because if you are listening to this on the day that it comes out, it is World Mental Health Day. And World Mental Health Day is all about awareness. It's about making people aware to what people are going through underneath the surface. People who you may know, or perhaps you yourself, might seem fine sometimes, but actually 1 in 4 people in their lifetime experience some sort of mental or neurological disorder. It's one of those things that we don't talk about, but is more common than we actually think, like domestic violence, sexual assault, having a miscarriage. All of these things have very similar statistics to this, but we don't talk about them. So they don't feel as common as they actually are. And today, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about what my story is. I want to talk about how this impacts my business and how it may impact your business. And I want to share what has helped for me. So if you've read some previous posts that I've written, I mean, I mention this all the time, but I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when, I was in my freshman year of college. So I was 18 years old, but this was kind of a long time coming. And this is something I am really open about, which I know a lot of people aren't, and I give full credit for that to my mom, because bipolar absolutely runs in my family. I can look at behaviors in people in my family, dead and alive, and see, yeah, that sounds like something an unmedicated person would do who is in crisis. But a lot of people in my family, and I think a lot of people just in general, from, my grandparents' generation back, self-medicated, mostly with alcohol. So that cycle broke with my mom, and I'm very, very grateful for that, because I was raised in a household where mental health was just as normal as physical health. This is just a thing. And when my brother was born, who is about 4.5 years younger than me, my mom almost died. So my mom had really intense PTSD. She was, going to a psychiatrist for it and everything. So it was just normal in my house. It was gotta go to the shrink. See you later. Do you want me to pick anything up on my way home? It was just a totally normal thing. You deal with your head just like you deal with anything else going on in your body. So my first real experiences in anything mental health related are, I'm trying to think of exactly when it was. I know. I had to see a psychologist when I was in 4th grade for some educational testing, because I was skipping a grade, which was exceptionally weird. And it was shortly after that time that my parents were getting a divorce, and my mom, being, very pro taking care of mental health, was like, okay, well, you just keep seeing that psychologist from time to time in case you need to talk to someone. And most of the time it was oh, whatever, I'll just hang out with him and talk about football. That's cool. But sometimes it was super helpful. And as I got older, kind of went through puberty, got to be in high school, I started to experience a lot of depression that I didn't really know where it was coming from. I just knew I felt not even sad. For me, and I will say at the top here, this is different for everybody. But the way I experience depression is not as a sadness. I experience depression as a numbness. I feel like a zombie. I don't really feel anything. I'm pretty good at faking being, amicable and happy in situations, even if I'm incredibly depressed under the surface, which is one of those skills people who deal with depression have to learn. But I started feeling that, and my doctor had diagnosed me with depression, but at the same time was like, okay, and we also think you have ADD. I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. If that's what you think, cool. So I refused to take ADD medication because it made me into a psycho person who wanted to just do all the things. And that was bad news bears for someone who turned out to be bipolar. But I went through a series of different antidepressants. And just like every person experiences this differently, every medicine is experienced differently. So you have to really find what works for you, and it takes time. There was one that I guess I apparently was addicted to. That was unbeknownst to me, because when I was coming off of it to try something else, I started having withdrawal, which is fucking awful. But all of that is to say that, I went through all of these different antidepressants. Some of them kind of worked, but they weren't really treating the real issue. I didn't have depression and attention deficit disorder. I had bipolar disorder. And because that diagnosis was wrong, and it often is in children, it didn't really get much better. I was okay, but I wasn't, significantly better. But it wasn't until I got to college that I started having obvious bipolar symptoms. And there was this one night, and I was in my dorm with my roommate, and I just started to experience what is called rapid cycling in bipolar disorder. In bipolar disorder, you swing, essentially. It's like a pendulum. You swing between extremes. It's depression on one side and manic activity on the other side. And I was swinging between these multiple times an hour, and it scared me shitless. So I called my mom, and my mom was like, yeah, I think I know what that sounds like. I'm going to come get you. So my mom came up to my school, which was a 3-hour drive, and she picked me up, and she brought me home, and she started to work on trying to get me into a psychiatrist, which was oddly difficult. It was strange because I had always had a psychologist, but he worked with my pediatrician to prescribe for me. So I'd never had to get into a psychiatrist before, and no one would see me because I wasn't suicidal. So it was, well, you'll have to go on the wait list. So when I finally found a doctor, it was through a day program at a hospital, and he was just phenomenal. And of course, being at a hospital, I'm seeing people who are way, way in a worse state than I am. But, I was just there to get help. I didn't really even think to compare myself, to be totally honest. I was actually pretty grateful that I was in the position that I was in, where it was like, okay, I need help. I'm going to go find a doctor. So I find this doctor. He's phenomenal. And he prescribes to me pretty damn close to the same medication I'm on today. It took some tweaking, but we finally found, that cocktail that works just right for me. And that's when I kind of had to go on this journey of learning about all this, because medicine's one thing that can help regulate the swings, but it can't really change how you think. You have to do that yourself. It's like how Ashlyn said on the last podcast, you can't outsource your push-ups. So I found that I was going to need to do some work on this for myself to both improve the way I felt, but also like get a grip on it and be able to communicate it. And I fully recognize that there is a large stigma around mental health, but I'm very grateful that that's something I didn't actually experience until, I think it was really until I moved to England. The system over there is different, and like, so many things in the story, so individualized. There are also shitty doctors. There are phenomenal doctors and there are shitty doctors. And if you have a shitty doctor who says something shitty to you, like, I don't know, Heidi, maybe crying isn't such a bad thing. Or do you really want to be taking bipolar medication your entire life? Would you say that to somebody who is taking diabetes medication? Would you want them to get off of that? I don't think that's wise, especially since I've been very stable for years. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. But I want you to know that if you encounter that stigma, or if there are people around you, whether you know it or not, that are going through this, they are probably encountering this kind of stigma. So what you can do for them is don't judge them. Don't downplay the way that they feel, because mental health issues are incredibly hard to describe to people who have not felt that way before. It's a very, very weird thing to have to try to communicate. And I think that's why depression is, is so often characterized as being sad, because that's the closest word so many of us have for it, but that's really not what it is. It's a very different feeling that's really hard to characterize. But I would, if you know anyone who has mental health issues, or even if you don't, educate yourself on it a little bit and realize that they might not want to talk about it because they might be afraid of being judged. Even if this is your best friend in the world, they may fear that you'll judge them. And by being open, you can show them that you won't judge them. And that's something I've tried to do for people. When I've had people come to me and tell me what they're going through, I try to relate like anything else. Like, oh yeah, I know how that goes. That sucks. So, what are you doing for it? How is it going? Try to be supportive, but don't downplay or coddle, because I think that is a very strange way that we react to mental health, because we don't know what's going on. So you just have to trust what the person is telling you, and you have to trust how you personally feel. And that stigma is a real bitch. And that's why I'm talking about this. This is why I openly talk about it, because I don't feel it. I am very open. I mean, this is the same thing for me as having like lactose intolerance, or overactive thyroid or something. Something you have to take medicine for. You don't take medicine for lactose intolerance, but an overactive thyroid, yeah, you would. That's something that you have to keep an eye on, and something that you have to have an awareness of. And for me, it's really no different. So try to treat the people around you, whether you know they're dealing with something or not, with openness, and try to be as non-judgmental as possible, and just treat it like you would any other health issue. Ask them how they're feeling. Ask them if you can do anything for them. It goes a long way. And in terms of things that have helped me, the number one thing is support, both personal and professional. So my support system is my family, my husband, some of my friends that I know I can talk to and that they'll understand, or that they will, engage. They won't run away from it. And honestly, especially with my husband, I honestly don't know what I would do without him. He's the one that sees issues coming from a mile away. He's the one that notices that I'm acting a little different before I even notice it. So he is my absolute foundation and lets me know essentially when shit's about to hit the fan, which it does, because this is something that I manage. It's not something that I cure. It's like an overactive thyroid, you manage it, or diabetes or something like that. So on the personal front, that's incredibly helpful. If you don't feel like you have people who you can trust and talk to in your immediate network of people, find them. They are out there. And some of the most supportive places I have found, when you just need to talk to somebody who gets it and you don't want to explain everything, are forums on specific illnesses. There are all sorts of different bipolar forums, and people talk about, their experience with this particular medication. And does this make anyone else feel this way? And how did you manage this? And oddly, it's going to sound weird if you don't use Reddit, but Reddit can be incredibly supportive when you really need to hear from people that the storm that you're in is going to come to an end, and it's going to be okay, and it can get better. Reddit is a surprisingly supportive place, and it's a place where I've loved, being able to hop in and talk to people who are in a position that, I was in 10 years ago, and say, look, this is how this goes. That's actually what you're experiencing is totally normal. And this is how it can get better. And I think most people think in terms of mostly medication for mental health disorders. And yeah, for me, that plays a very important role. Some people manage it in other ways. Some people don't need medication. Some people don't respond to medication. But I think the support element cannot be overplayed. It's just the most important thing, to know that you're not alone, to know that other people understand and are there for you and want to help you. And on the professional side, making sure that you have that support. Like I was saying, there are shitty doctors. There are shitty doctors that will completely minimize what you're feeling. And there are amazing doctors who you were like, please never retire. Oh my God, I don't know what I'd do without you. But finding that support on the professional side is really crucial. And that could be through a psychiatrist, that could be through a psychologist, that could be through a therapist, whatever you need. But having someone that makes you feel heard makes a big difference. And I've noticed psychiatry is very odd, because most other areas of medicine, if you break your leg, you can do an x-ray and see exactly what's going on. Like if there's something, like you're really tired all the time. Okay, we can run blood work and see what's going on that might be causing that. But when it comes to mental health, it's not something you can just run a test for. It's something that you have to talk through. And it's something that you have to have someone who is open to that and is open to listening. And I have absolutely come across medical professionals who have a really shitty perspective on mental health, have a just get over it kind of perspective. But guess what? You don't have to go to that person. you can just move on and find someone else. And yeah, it's going to make you really angry, and it should, because that's ridiculous. But there are amazing supportive professionals out there that can help you. So meds and support, both really, really helpful. And in speaking of shitty doctors, learning to advocate for myself was one of the most important things that I did. And I learned this from my mom. I watched my mom do this, where, a doctor would say, we're going to do this. And it's no, like, I don't want to do that, or I'm not comfortable with that, or I don't think you're listening to me. Really just being adamant that you need to be heard. And because a relationship between a doctor or therapist and a mental health patient is so collaborative, it really needs to be this back and forth. It can't be the doctor just dictating things to you and you just accepting that. And sometimes you do have to advocate for yourself. You have to fight for yourself. You have to recognize when you have a doctor who's not listening to you, or this just isn't a good fit for whatever reason. Another thing that's really helped me is being open. I recognize that I grew up in a unique situation where mental health was not stigmatized in any way in my family. My dad wasn't the biggest fan of psychiatry, but that was like random passing comments, which I think is interesting, but I don't know where that came from. I just know he had his own stuff and he managed to somehow deal with it without any sort of medication. And I really don't know how he did it, because his siblings did not. And it's incredible to me that there are people who can work that out for themselves. But here's the thing, you don't have to. And that's why people like therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists are there to support you. Because if you're open about this, you don't have to be alone in it. If you can even just talk to some stranger on Reddit about your experience, that openness feels like you have more control. And sometimes with, like I was describing when I was first going through rapid cycling with bipolar, I felt entirely out of control. I didn't know what was going to happen 5 minutes from now. Am I going to be laughing or crying? Who knows? And I don't know why either, which is terrifying. But when you are open, it really does give you a semblance of control, because you are taking control of your story and you're taking control of that narrative. And it's really funny. I've had conversations with friends and they've been like, oh, so-and-so was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And I was like, oh yeah, I have bipolar disorder. And they're like, what? You do? I'm like, yeah. I mean, it's never come up, but yeah, like and you see the shift and they're like, well, what is that like? And they realize it's not as insane as it kind of sounds, at least most of the time in my experience and in my current stage. But I am a big proponent of being open. It can be scary, and there are some people who suck and they might judge you, but those aren't necessarily the people you want to have in your life. Another thing that really helped me, and there's two things that go really well together, are mindfulness and gratitude. And I started looking into mindfulness, I think just out of an interest in Buddhism. I had taken a comparative religion class in college. It was really fascinating. I didn't know much about Eastern religions. And I learned a lot about the way Buddhism works, and it fascinated me. And I started reading more on mindfulness, really just having this awareness and actually meditating and working on having this mindfulness, that whole focus on your breath, pay attention to your breath and only your breath. That has helped me so much, because when you have any kind of mental issues, you have to really be aware of what's going on. You have to listen to your body. And if you're not in tune with what your body's saying and you can't hear it, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. You're not going to see things coming that you could have prevented. And actually, studying mindfulness helped my anxiety a lot. And I remember watching a talk with the Dalai Lama, whose laugh is just like the most beautiful thing in the world to me. And in it, he said something to the effect of deciding, first of all, you have a choice on how you respond to things. You have a choice of what happens, but you have a choice of how you respond, which smacked me in the face. I had never thought about that. And then he said that, holding resentment towards someone or hatred towards someone is like ingesting poison and hoping the other person dies. And that really clicked for me. And I realized that I needed to be more aware of my thoughts. And that's when I started really focusing on gratitude. And that's something I still do. I definitely take stock on a daily basis of things I'm grateful for. And it's shifted my worldview substantially, where I can look at a situation that's less than ideal and see the good and not just the bad. And sometimes, it's little things. It's how comfortable my bed is. It's really, really simple stuff. The other thing that is incredibly important that I learned, and this has a direct application. That's the word I'm going for. Application to business. And it's that I learned I had to put my health first. I had to, as they say on flights, put my own oxygen mask on first before assisting others. Because, if you don't have oxygen flowing in your mask, you're pretty useless to other people if you are just completely passed out on a plane. A lot of people feel like their health and self-care, especially in business, because sometimes we get into this cult of like hustling and you got to do all the things and then they all need to be done now. And don't get me wrong, I do that. I get caught up in that just as much as anybody else, but I have to come first. Self-care is not a luxury. I have to take care of myself, because if I don't take care of myself, the whole ship sinks. A lot of people feel like if they're not working on something, they're wasting their time. And taking time for yourself can be hard, especially if you have a million things to do. But I have learned through this that your business can't exist unless you have your oxygen mask on. If you are running around frantically about to pass out trying to assist others, you're just going to hit the ground and you're going to be completely useless. And I get that it can feel, luxurious. And when you think about how some companies treat their staff, like Google has nap rooms, which sounds amazing to me. But by giving yourself what you need, you're able to do your best work. So consider if you are actually giving yourself what it is that you need and make that the number one priority, whether you're dealing with mental health issues or not. Because if you don't do that, you risk just everything crashing and burning. In addition to putting yourself first, knowing yourself well enough to know when you need help has been something that I have learned by force through dealing with bipolar disorder. Because, I don't have that luxury. I have to, if I want to feel better, I need help. I know that. And I don't have any shame in asking for help. There have been plenty of times when I just think, okay, I need to call my doctor, or I need my medicine tweaked. Because psychiatry is weird. It's not a perfect science. It requires the patient being able to understand what they're feeling and ask for help. It absolutely requires you to ask for help. So it's something I have had to learn for my own health, but it's something that's really helped my business, because I know through mindfulness, paying attention to myself, paying attention to how I'm feeling, when I'm feeling drained, when I'm starting to burn out, and when I have more than I can handle on my hands. And I know that when that happens, I need to ask for help. That might be in my personal life, or that might be outsourcing something to get the work done. But it's okay to ask for help, because, no one achieves anything alone. Let's be honest. You don't have to, nor can you, do everything alone. And neither can anyone else, really. The final thing that has really helped me has been learning about moderation. So, I was in my freshman year of college when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So, my first question is, okay, I've heard you're not supposed to drink on bipolar medication. Is that actually true? And he said, yeah, it can make your depression worse because alcohol is a depressant, but moderation is your best friend, and you should pay attention to how you feel. And at that time, that would be, if I'm pulling an all-nighter, I'm taking it easy the next day. But in my business now, that applies to the intensity of my work and how I schedule my work. I'm not doing a lot of really intense days back to back to back, because moderation is your friend. Getting help is really important, but making sure that you're not taking on too much so that you're just going to crash and burn and just completely burn yourself out is a very, very important skill to learn. And that applies to work as much as that applies to your health. So in talking about this, I really want you to know that if you're going through, or if you have any sort of mental illness, mental disorder, you're not alone. And quite honestly, if I could get rid of my bipolar disorder, especially because I'm so stable at this point, I don't know if I would. It's not rainbows and unicorns, but it's taught me so much about my brain and about my health and about my business and about just how I operate in the world. And I've learned a lot from other people's experiences. And I don't actually feel like it's a hindrance at all. I don't feel like it's a disability. I see it as somewhat of an advantage because I see things differently. I have a tendency to question everything, and that really helps. I also have a tendency to really think through how and why I'm doing things, because I need to. I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself and I'm not taking on too much. I will say I'm not well suited for 9-to-5 corporate culture, and I'm totally fine with that. Sometimes it sucks having to deal with bipolar disorder, but I feel like the way my brain works cannot be separated from it. So I don't, hate it. All of these things that I've learned are things that anyone can take and implement, both in their personal life and in their business. And the ups and downs that come with bipolar are just so similar to running a business. And I think in both, you have to learn to accept those ups and downs. You can't beat yourself up when there are downs. And that goes for depression as well. You can't hate yourself because of something that's happening to your brain chemistry. And that's the way I think of it. I'm very far removed from like thinking that there's something wrong with me. Like, no, my brain chemistry just does this thing as opposed to this thing. I'm very accepting of it, and being accepting of it has allowed me to really take advantage of what it has taught me. Because I meet plenty of people who are on their way to burnout. And it happens to me too sometimes. It happened to me recently. Doesn't happen that often though. But I prioritize myself. My sleep comes first. My life needs to have space for both having a business and having a life. That's just a non-negotiable. There are some things that I'm not willing to give up on, and I just structure things a little bit differently. So I think you really just need to accept where you are and the ups and downs that are going to happen in your business, the ups and downs that are going to happen in your brain. And it's incredibly important, though, to always put your own oxygen mask on first. And if that means cutting certain people out of your life because they are toxic to you, that's what you need to do. If that means getting help professionally, that's what you need to do. And I'm going to link to some resources in the show notes. But I did want to say, everyone's journey, everyone's experience is different. But if you are in a crisis situation right now, if you're in the US, you can reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And I will link to this in the show notes, as well as all of the international numbers. But the US number is 1-800-273-TALK, or you can actually text them. You can text the word TALK to 741-741. And if you are in the US, I know insurance can always be a hindrance to getting help. And I came across a site that provides therapists online. Doesn't really matter where you're located. And they're affordable, and insurance isn't required like it is for some therapists that you would go see. And you can find that at betterhelp.com. But if you are feeling like you need some help, Google mental health resources, and then whatever your local area is, whether it's the county, the state, the city you're in, because there are a lot of resources out there for you. They just may not be super obvious to you. Just like there are a lot of people, 25% of all people in their lifetimes are going to face some sort of mental or neurological disorder. That may not be obvious, but it's there. So be aware of what your body is telling you, whether you are dealing with a mental disorder or not. And I guarantee you it's going to help. If you want to come share your story and open up, I would love to hear it. Come on over to the Facebook group. You can find that at evolveyourweddingbusiness.com/group. If you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to come join me inside the Wedding Business Collective. It is the place to be if you want to grow your wedding business without going crazy in the process. Inside the Wedding Business Collective, we have over $4,000 worth of courses on everything you can imagine, from productivity to creating a marketing plan to Instagram to Facebook ads to pricing. The list goes on, and the course library is constantly growing to fit the needs of the members. You will also get access to me as your wedding business coach and sidekick, and you can ask questions and get feedback in our incredibly supportive community of creative wedding professionals, or dig into a problem deep with me on one of our group mastermind calls. Now, there's even more than that inside the Wedding Business Collective, so go find out all about it and start your free trial at theweddingbusinesscollective.com. Be sure to use coupon code podcast to extend that trial to 14 days. You have got nothing to lose, so go take it for a test drive and see if it's right for you. I'll see you there.